Hello, how is everyone doing today? It is Monday. It is week 4 of the college football season, coming off week 3. And I know Auburn fans have to be disappointed after the trip to Happy Valley that unfortunately did not end in Auburn's favor. The final score 28-20, and that loss to Penn State. And what a tough one. And there to kind of break everything down, who was in the mix, felt the atmosphere, felt the environment, and obviously felt some of the disappointments of that game. Tom Green joins us now to kind of break things down, sort of what you saw, and not obviously all doom and gloom, but just first and foremost, let's start with the atmosphere. I know, Tom, last week you told us it would be your first trip to Happy Valley. I was actually on a plane to Philly and had a lot of Auburn fans on my plane, so it seemed like of course, amongst the whiteout, I didn't see too much orange, but it felt like, Auburn fans were obviously up for this one, and there was a good bit of Auburn fans that traveled. But from your standpoint and your vantage point, what was the atmosphere like there in Happy Valley for a night game?
Oh, it was really cool. I think it kind of lived up to all the expectations. Just seeing that sea of white it really pops, especially at night. I will say that there was a really impressive turnout of Auburn fans. During Tiger Walk, there was just a sea of orange outside of that gate, and they were loud and they were vocal. I know some players have already taken to Twitter and stuff, and thanked the fans for making that trip and said that they didn't go unnoticed, that they were able to hear them even among those nearly 110,000 fans. But yeah, no, it was a really cool atmosphere. Pre-game environment was great. It's kind of neat just like looking out from the top of the stadium and just seeing tailgating for miles around, because you're just in kind of this valley between mountains. So that was really cool to see. The student section was really loud and vocal for most of the night. Where they had the visiting media seated in the press box, we were down on that end toward the student section. So, we got to experience it. And, when they got really loud at times, the press box kind of swayed a little bit.
I was going to say, did you feel the sway?
Yeah, kind of like it does at Texas A&M. So that was interesting. The stadium itself, it reminded me a lot of the Swamp down in Florida, just the way it's, constructed. With the tall, steep stands on the sidelines and then the overhanging upper decks. As for the noise level, they brought it at times throughout the game. I'd still personally, from the places that I've experienced, I think, LSU and Florida for big games felt a little bit louder. Maybe that's just, the SEC environment, but, certainly Penn State, they have a really impressive environment up there on game day, especially for that whiteout.
Yeah, I was going to say, anytime the press box sways, you're in good in good hands with the raucous crowd. And I'm with you. I think LSU. I do remember LSU. You can definitely feel it there, and of course Texas A&M. With that being said, just kind of going off the environment. The first big game for this Auburn football team this year. The first sort of display of going up against a tougher opponent. And certainly not at home in the confines of Jordan-Hare Stadium. And, I think the first thing to kind of point out, just the offense, starting on the offensive side of the football, it just kind of seemed like Auburn was out of sync at times. Not the entire game. There were, glimmers of, productive offense. Obviously, Tank Bigsby, he was still able to get 102 yards rushing, 2 touchdowns. Bo Nix only passed for 185 yards. 0 touchdowns, but also 0 interceptions. It just seemed like there was still sort of those signs of struggle on the road, and the offense just seemed out of sync and wasn't able to hit some of those deep shots downfield, those explosives that really can turn and shift the momentum in favor of the Tigers.
Yeah, definitely. The passing game, let's start there. Brian Harsin said afterward that, they just didn't do good enough in the passing game. He didn't put the blame on any one person. It's, really everybody involved, from Bo Nix to the wide receivers. They just didn't seem like they were able to really get on the same page. There were some misfires from Bo. There were some drops from the receivers. I know there was a play where Shedrick Jackson, looked like he had a big chunk play down the sideline, but tripped over his own feet and kind of got tangled up and just couldn't haul it in. there were a few times that, the offensive line was a little bit spotty in pass protection. So Bo was rushed a little bit. They didn't give up a sack, which is good. But still, it just felt like there was something off about that passing offense. And, you look at Bo's numbers, I think he finished 21 of 37, like you said, 185 yards, no touchdowns, no interceptions. But he probably, there was at least one play where he probably should have been picked off, and it was nearly a pick six at the end of that first half, which really would have been a backbreaker. Auburn got really fortunate that, Penn State's, I think it was Brandon Smith, just bobbled the ball for what felt like 10, 15 yards before he dropped it. So, they were fortunate to avoid that. But, for Bo Nix, you look at his numbers, it was kind of the same story for him on the road. He avoided the big mistake, which is good, but, just the overall numbers, completing 56% of his passes, just not being able to hit those deep shots. That's something that this offense really needs. And, they just weren't able to get on the same page. Receivers were, out of place at a couple times. Again, they just felt out of sync and they weren't able to connect. But on the other hand, they've really got something there with that run game. This offensive line can create space in the run game. You have one of the best running backs in the country in Tank Bigsby, and he showed that again on Saturday night against a pretty good Penn State defensive front. And again, Jarquez Hunter just continues to be a real bright spot as a freshman, providing that second running back in the rotation these last 3 games.
Yeah, and I think the run game, just based on the offensive production they've had thus far, the run game certainly pulls some of the pressure off of Bo Nix. But I think, to your point, kind of off the top, taking some of those deep shots, being able to hit some of those, those long passes downfield, the vertical passing game, some of those are so critical, especially in shifting momentum in an environment like this. And, that obviously gives everyone more confidence, offense, defense. Everyone gets a bolster of confidence when you're able to get those explosives. And if you can't create those explosives, then, a lot obviously rests on the run game and, of course, on Bo Nix's shoulders. And, to your point, too, I think that's one of the biggest things everyone wanted to see from this quarterback this year is his ability to go on the road, play in tough environments, keep his poise, keep sort of that demeanor. And obviously, like you said, he played fairly mistake-free, obviously not giving up an interception, got lucky there. But, I guess, with that kind of being said, I know Coach Harsin obviously very disappointed about this loss. He did not hide that from his emotions, on the field, obviously in the press conferences, really sort of breaking things down for us, kind of giving sort of his perspective on things. Sort of your takeaways from the defensive side of the football. I think one of the biggest things I saw was that Auburn was really unable to get any kind of consistent pass rush going. Penn State kept extending plays. They were able to avoid the quarterback pressure. You mentioned it made Sean Clifford look really good, right? It made him look like a really top tier talented quarterback, and kind of even going into this one saying, based on some of his comments in the week, this is a really confident guy and we don't really quite know just how good he's going to be. And, Auburn's defense kind of made him look a little extra good in this one. So what's your takeaway on that?
Yeah, I mean, Sean Clifford entered this game as a career 60% passer. Never really had those big wow moments, especially in these big games. And, against Auburn, he was just surgical. I think he completed 28 of 32 passes, 280 yards, 2 touchdowns. He did have 1 interception, which, came at the very end of the first half. It was, essentially an arm punt. Oddly enough, it came on the one play where Auburn was credited with a quarterback hurry. So obviously when they can get to the quarterback, good things happen. They just weren't able to consistently get to him. And, sometimes it was a 3-man pass rush that they just weren't able to get to it. There were other times where, he escaped a little bit of pressure and kind of extended plays with his legs and got passes out to the perimeter. But, bottom line, Auburn just was not able to get a consistent push up front against him. And, there were times where I know there was one snap in the first quarter, I think it was, where it felt like he had 10 seconds to throw that thing. And, that's just not going to cut it because that's asking a lot for the secondary to, stay in coverage for that long. And, when you can't get a consistent pass rush like that, you make the quarterback more comfortable. And we saw that because, he had a day against Auburn's secondary, which, through these first 3 weeks has surprisingly felt like the weak link of this defense. We entered the season, thinking, hey, look at what they bring back with, Roger McCreary and Nehemiah Pritchett and Jalen Simpson and Smoke Monday. And then kind of just that influx of talented transfers that they brought in with Donovan Kaufman and Badarius Knighton and Ro Torrance and Drayshawn Miller and those guys. The secondary just really hasn't been up to par through these first 3 games. Even in those first 2 games where Auburn dominated, you could hear guys like Smoke Monday and Roger McCreary talking about, they were kind of disappointed with their performance on the back end. They felt like they were giving up too high a completion rate. They felt they needed to tighten things up, and they were confident that they'd be able to, once things got a little bit more difficult for them. And we just didn't see that on Saturday night. Obviously the high completion rate is a major concern. Clifford completed over 80% of his passes. That's twice in 3 games. Twice in 3 games now that Auburn's allowed that. They had not allowed a team to complete more than 80% of their passes since 2010 against Kentucky entering this season. But it's not just the high completion rate. It's that they actually got, big chunk plays against them too. It's one thing when you're trying to keep everything in front of you and you allow high completion rate like we saw. I think it was in the Akron game in the second half. But when you're giving up chunk plays too, that's a big concern. Penn State had 7 passes of at least 15 yards, 6 of those coming from Clifford, 1 coming on a trick play pass from Jahan Dotson. And just those 2 combined, it's kind of a recipe for disaster.
Yeah, and Hank Champion in here making the comment, Clifford sitting in the pocket long enough to play checkers didn't help. It's interesting. Clifford, he had an 87.5% completion percentage, which is actually the highest in a game by a Penn State player in 25 years. So there's that statistic that definitely, can make us cringe, on this side of things. And obviously Auburn fans kind of looking at that like, ooh, we got some work to do. Also defensively, Owen Papo left in the second half. Any updates on him at this point? I imagine we'll get an update hopefully from Coach in his press conference today.
Yeah, Brian Harsin didn't have an update on him after the game. He left in the second half and didn't return. Harsin said himself, Owen's a tough guy. So we'll see, kind of where things stand with him this week, whether he'll be able to go for Georgia State or whether they're going to want to, let him kind of take his time and get right ahead of, the SEC opener next week at LSU.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then obviously, they lost Zakoby McClain in the fourth quarter there on what felt like a questionable targeting call. So he'll miss the first half of the Georgia State game. So we'll see what Auburn's linebacker core looks like this week, just in terms of who's available and what kind of depth they'll have there.
Yeah, no doubt, because those 2 guys certainly the heartbeat of that linebacking core. So I imagine we'll get some updates from Coach Harsin there. And speaking on Coach Harsin, some comments, a lot of questions afterwards. And I don't know if you happen to ask any of these questions, but I think you'll have some good answers for us. Some questionable calls from the coaching staff and people, Harsin was pretty frank, answered with great detail, sort of what he was seeing, specifically the 4th-and-goal with just over 3 minutes left in the game. That was obviously a big one. The trick play was another one to open the second half. Just some calls that obviously didn't go in their favor. So when they don't go in Auburn's favor, that's when you ask the question. So I just want to get your thoughts, sort of your takeaways on what you saw and the response from Coach Harsin on those.
Yeah, so obviously it's a results-oriented thing. If these plays work out, nobody has any questions. When they don't go your way and then you lose the game, you're going to get second-guessed. And I think there were really three play calls there in the second half that, people are, second-guessing. The first, that trick play on the very first play of the second half when Auburn was down 4, wound up being a fumble. They were trying to run an end around to Kobe Hudson, who was a high school quarterback. They felt like during the week they saw something where that play would work out. That wasn't the case. Penn State had it covered well, whether they were prepared for it or they were just playing good coverage. They didn't have it, so Kobe kind of tried to tuck it and scramble, and he fumbled the ball unforced. Penn State recovered it and then quickly scored and went up 2 scores. Again, that's a play that they felt that they had something that week in practice from what they saw on film. And, if it goes well, everybody's praising them for being so aggressive and being able to capitalize on that. Even if it, doesn't work out as well and, you just get, minimal gain, it's like, okay, it's fine. You took a chance. Worst case scenario is what happened and they went down 2 scores. Second one, I think at the very beginning of the fourth quarter, they faced a 4th-and-1 and trailing by 4, they decided to kick a field goal. Anders Carlson made it, of course, cut it to 1-point game. I think a lot of fans would have liked to see a little bit more aggression there. Especially you hear all throughout the offseason about, Harsin and his staff instilling this 4th-and-1 mentality every day. So for them to finally see a 4th-and-1 in a big situation and to settle for a field goal instead of being a little aggressive, kind of felt out of place. But, I get it. You want to keep it a 1-point game there. But really, I think the biggest one that everybody had a lot of issue with was that 4th-and-goal call late in the game, down 8. You run a fade, which was, it's a low percentage play to begin with. Especially when you don't really have a really proven wide receiver core at this point. Brian Harsin talked about the play a little bit after the game. Bo Nix had 5 reads. Auburn was in a 4-receiver set, 3 receivers, tight end John Samuel Shanker out in the slot, and then Tank Bigsby in the backfield. And, he said he wanted to go back and rewatch the play before he, really assessed whether Bo made the right decision or went through his reads properly. Whether Kobe Hudson was the first read on that play or what. But, just watching the play, it looked like Bo immediately went to him, didn't hesitate. And, Kobe got tangled up with the defensive back. The throw looked like it was off target, maybe had a little bit too much air on it. And they just had no shot at completing that play in that situation with really the game on the line for them. Obviously some visible frustration from players after that play, Tank Bigsby in particular. He looked disappointed, which is understandably so because, Auburn was running the ball so effectively in that position, or really in the second half there. And, Tank Bigsby, like you said, over 100 yards, had both of Auburn's touchdowns in the game. And really, he's their best player. And it just felt a little bit out of place that they didn't go to their best player in a critical spot like that. Again, if things work out differently, nobody's questioning these calls, nobody's second guessing them. But when, things don't go your way, you leave yourself open to, those kinds of criticisms and critiques. Yeah,
absolutely. And of course, again, Harsin certainly doing his best to explain sort of the thought process behind it, giving us, some intel from his vantage point, but, disappointing in a lot of ways. And I know Auburn fans are disappointed. And, this one was certainly within reach, and they go to Penn State, they go to a wild and crazy environment and still come up just 8 points short. And obviously, some missed opportunities there. But a lot to build on. And certainly, that coaching staff will go back to the film room and kind of get things squared away. Of course, this week they're back at home, Jordan-Hare Stadium. They play Georgia State, obviously a team they'll be expected to beat. I don't know what the line on that. I think I saw the line. Is it 24-point favorite coming in? So a lot to clean up, a lot to figure out, a lot to work on. And I think this will be a good time to do it before they get into some of the bigger games that they have on the slate coming up. The competition certainly only going to get harder from here on out. So that game, Georgia State, Jordan-Hare Stadium, 3:00 SEC Network. Tom, so much appreciate your insight. I'm glad you had a fun trip there in Happy Valley. I know it was a cool environment to be in, certainly. And thank you all for watching, and we'll see you again next week.